The cabin hummed with the soft murmur of passengers settling into their plush seats. Olivia Parker, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, adjusted the gold bracelet on her wrist and glanced at the glass partition separating first class from the rest of the plane. The subtle hostility in the air was impossible to ignore. The flight attendant, Jessica Hart, moved down the aisle with a tray of sparkling champagne, her smile warm for every passenger except Olivia. When Jessica reached Olivia's row, she paused, glanced at her ticket, and turned away without a word. Olivia felt the slight but unmistakable sting of exclusion. Her heart quickened. She could feel the eyes of nearby passengers flick in her direction. The man across the aisle, a silver-haired executive with an expensive watch, gave a half-smile as if sharing an unspoken joke with the attendant. Olivia's instinct was to let it go, but then she remembered her father's words, "Your silence teaches people how to treat you." With deliberate calm, she unlocked her phone and dialed a number she rarely used, a direct line to Global Sky Airlines' corporate office, where she once consulted on their diversity initiative. The tension thickened. Jessica turned, her eyes narrowing as she heard Olivia speak. "This is Olivia Parker on Flight 237 to New York. We have a situation requiring immediate intervention." Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. The man across the aisle sat straighter, his grin vanishing. Olivia ended the call and placed the phone on the tray table. She didn't raise her voice or glare at anyone. She simply waited. Minutes later, a soft chime announced the cabin crew's intercom activation. "Senior cabin manager to first class immediately," came the disembodied voice. Jessica's face blanched. The steady rhythm of the flight was replaced by a palpable wave of anticipation. The curtain swished aside and David Shaw, the senior cabin manager, stepped in. He scanned the cabin and approached Olivia with measured steps. "Miss Parker, I'm David Shaw. Can you please describe the situation?" His voice was professional but strained. "I requested champagne along with the rest of the first-class passengers," Olivia said, keeping her voice calm and clear. "Miss Hart skipped me, then implied I might not belong here. I'd like this addressed, but more importantly, I want to know what your airline plans to do about it long-term." David's jaw tightened. He turned toward Jessica, who stood rigidly by the galley, her eyes fixed on the carpet. "Miss Hart, please follow me," he said. "We'll discuss this further in the galley." As Jessica passed Olivia, her forced smile faltered. The passengers who had previously ignored the situation now shifted uncomfortably. The executive across the aisle adjusted his watch and looked out the window. Olivia exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of her bracelet. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was demanding respect. The incident was far from over, but the shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. And for the first time on that flight, Olivia felt she was finally being seen. David Shaw stood in the galley with Jessica Hart, the tension between them thick as static before a storm. Jessica shifted her weight from foot to foot, her usual mask of pleasant professionalism replaced by something closer to defiance. "I didn't do anything wrong," she muttered. "That woman was being overly sensitive." David's eyes hardened. "Miss Hart, we have protocols for a reason," he said. "You know better than to make passengers feel unwelcome, especially in first class, where service expectations are crystal clear." Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line. "She didn't look like she belonged," she blurted out before catching herself. David's stomach dropped. There it was, the ugly truth laid bare. He inhaled slowly and tapped his headset. "This is Shaw. Notify corporate we have a confirmed service incident and suspend Miss Hart effective immediately." Jessica's face turned pale. "Wait, I didn't mean—" she stammered, but David had already turned away. Back in the cabin, Olivia sat rigidly in her seat, watching passengers cast sideways glances. Her phone vibrated with an incoming message. "Miss Parker, we've escalated your concern. Expect a senior manager to meet you upon landing. Thank you for your patience." Her shoulders sagged with relief. The man across the aisle who had mocked her earlier now fiddled awkwardly with his tie. "Guess you know people in high places," he said with a forced chuckle. Olivia met his gaze and replied evenly, "I know the value of self-respect." The flight continued in tense silence. Olivia reflected on how often people allowed microaggressions to pass unchecked. She thought of her father, who once explained that dignity wasn't just about demanding respect, but demonstrating it. She turned toward the window and saw her reflection, calm, resolute. In the galley, a young attendant named Rachel Reed observed everything with wide eyes. She'd only been on the job for 3 months and had already seen more than she expected. When David returned from his call, she hesitated before speaking. "Sir," she said softly. If I see something like that again, should I speak up? David's expression softened. Always, he said. That's how we change things. Rachel nodded, the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. Olivia watched the exchange from her seat, recognizing the spark of awareness igniting in the young woman. Change often started with a single person deciding to stand up, and today, it seemed, was that day. The plane cruised steadily at 35,000 feet, but the tension in the cabin hadn't dissipated. Olivia sat upright, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her, though she wasn't watching the movie. Her mind kept replaying the flight attendant's words, that sharp comment laced with disbelief. "Are you sure you belong here?" The low murmur of conversations filtered through the cabin, punctuated by the occasional clink of ice and glasses. Across the aisle, the silver-haired man who had mocked her shifted uncomfortably under her glance. Olivia wasn't angry. She was exhausted. Years of navigating boardrooms, conferences, and corporate dinners had taught her how deeply ingrained biases could be. Rachel Reed appeared beside her seat with a hesitant smile. "Miss Parker, would you like something to eat or drink?" Olivia gave a small nod. "A cup of tea, please. Earl Grey if you have it." Rachel disappeared toward the galley, returning with a steaming mug moments later. As Olivia wrapped her hands around the warmth, she noticed a slight tremor in the young woman's fingers. "You okay?" Olivia asked softly. Rachel hesitated, then exhaled. "I should have stepped in earlier," she admitted. "I saw it happening, but I froze. I was afraid of what might happen if I said something." Olivia gave a reassuring smile. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she said. "It's acting despite it, and you did the right thing when it mattered." Rachel straightened slightly. "Thank you," she said. "I'll remember that." The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into New York shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables secured." Olivia glanced out the window as the sprawling city lights came into view below, each glowing window representing a life, a story. She reflected on how small, everyday actions could either uphold or undermine someone's dignity. The descent felt symbolic, a return to reality, but also a plunge into the aftermath of the day's events. As the wheels touched down with a jolt, Olivia's phone vibrated with another message. "Miss Parker, our VP of Customer Relations, Mr. Alan Green, will meet you at the gate." She felt a mix of anticipation and weariness. The incident was over, but the real work, ensuring meaningful change, was just beginning. The plane taxied to the gate, and Olivia Parker unfastened her seatbelt, her mind already preparing for the conversation ahead. The cabin door opened, and passengers began gathering their belongings with a quiet, collective urgency. Olivia remained seated until Rachel Reed reappeared. "Miss Parker," she said softly, "Mr. Green is waiting for you at the jet bridge." Olivia stood, smoothing her suit jacket as she followed Rachel to the exit. The air in the jet bridge was cool and sterile compared to the cabin's recycled warmth. A tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair waited just beyond the door. "Miss Parker," he greeted, extending his hand. "I'm Alan Green. I appreciate your patience." His grip was firm but respectful. Olivia nodded. "Thank you for taking this seriously." Alan gestured toward the terminal. "Would you mind stepping into the lounge? We've arranged a quiet space to discuss the incident and next steps." As they walked through the terminal, Olivia noticed passengers from the flight glancing in her direction. The silver-haired executive from first class hurried past without meeting her eyes. In the lounge, a private room awaited, with a tray of refreshments and a discreetly closed door. Alan sat opposite Olivia and opened a leather folder. "First, I want to personally apologize for what happened today. It was unacceptable and does not reflect our company's values." Olivia inclined her head. "Apology accepted, but I'm more interested in what happens next." Alan straightened. "We've already suspended the flight attendant involved and launched an internal investigation, but we want to go further. If you're open to it, we'd like your input on strengthening our staff training program." The proposal caught Olivia off guard. "You want me to help you fix this?" "You've consulted with companies on similar issues," Alan said. "Your insight could help us make meaningful changes." Olivia sat back, considering. Her father's words echoed again. Dignity isn't just personal, it's collective. She realized this was bigger than her own experience. "I'll help," she said finally, "but only if you're serious about real, long-term changes." Alan extended his hand again. "Deal," he said. Olivia shook it, feeling the weight of the commitment settle into her chest. The path ahead wasn't simple, but it was necessary, and Olivia Parker was ready to walk it. Olivia Parker stepped out of the airport lounge, the weight of her conversation with Alan Green still pressing down on her. The commitment she'd just made wasn't one she took lightly. Her mind raced through the possible implications, corporate culture shifts, training strategies, and the inevitable resistance that always accompanied systemic change. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, exhaled deeply, and made her way to the car service area. The cool night air hit her face, grounding her in the moment. The car ride home was quiet, save for the occasional buzz of her phone. Olivia ignored the messages for now. She needed time to process. The city lights blurred through the window, each glowing orb a silent reminder of the countless people navigating their own daily battles. The driver, sensing her mood, didn't attempt small talk. At home, she poured herself a cup of tea and settled into the worn leather armchair by the window. Her phone vibrated again. She finally checked it, a message from her father. "Proud of you," it read simply. Olivia smiled faintly, knowing he'd probably seen the news circulating online. The story of the in-flight incident had already started to spread. She scrolled through comments, strangers praising her poise, sharing their own stories of being overlooked or dismissed. But among the support, there were also skeptics, questioning if she'd overreacted. Olivia closed the app, unwilling to spiral into an endless loop of online debates. Her focus had to remain on what came next. The next morning, she called Alan Green. "I want to start by reviewing your current training materials," she said. "Let's build a plan from there." Alan agreed without hesitation. Within hours, she received an email with attachments detailing their protocols. Olivia immersed herself in the documents, highlighting gaps and noting areas for improvement. It was clear that the airline's policies on inclusivity were more about appearances than actionable practices. A week later, she walked into the airline's headquarters for a meeting with the executive team. The polished glass walls and sleek furniture projected a sense of modernity, but Olivia wondered if the mindset inside matched the decor. Alan greeted her in the lobby and escorted her to the boardroom, where a group of executives waited with polite smiles. "Thank you for coming," Alan began. "Olivia Parker has graciously agreed to help us strengthen our training and inclusivity programs." Olivia stood. "Thank you for having me," she said. "Before we dive in, I want to share why this matters. This isn't just about one passenger or one flight attendant. It's about creating a culture where respect and dignity aren't optional." She then outlined her observations and suggestions, her voice steady and confident. The room remained silent, but she could feel the weight of their attention. Afterward, an older executive, Tom Henderson, leaned forward. "Sounds good on paper," he said, "but how do we ensure this sticks beyond a training session?" "Accountability," Olivia answered. "Real, measurable consequences for policy violations, and recognition for those who demonstrate the right behaviors. People replicate what gets rewarded and avoid what gets punished." Tom nodded slowly. "Fair point." The meeting concluded with an agreement to launch a pilot program within the next quarter. Olivia walked out of the building feeling cautiously optimistic. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but the first step was taken. That evening, as she sat by her window again, her phone buzzed. A message from Rachel Reed appeared on the screen. "Thank you for what you're doing. It matters." Olivia's eyes softened. She typed back, "We're doing it together." The morning sun cast a muted glow through Olivia Parker's living room window as she sat at her desk, reviewing the presentation she'd prepared for Global Sky Airlines. The upcoming training session would mark the first major step in the airline's commitment to change. Olivia had spent the past 2 weeks meticulously crafting content that balanced practical procedures with the deeper, more challenging conversations about bias and professionalism. Her phone vibrated, a message from Alan Green. "All set for today? Let me know if you need anything." Olivia texted back a quick thumbs up, though her stomach churned with nerves. It wasn't the presentation that unsettled her. It was the weight of responsibility. She knew this initiative had to be more than corporate lip service. Real people were counting on it. Arriving at the airline's training facility, Olivia found Alan waiting at the entrance. "Nervous?" he asked as they walked toward the conference room. "Not about the material," Olivia said, "just hoping it resonates." Inside, the room filled gradually with crew members in crisp uniforms. Olivia scanned the faces, searching for openness amidst the skepticism. Some attendants chatted quietly, others sat with arms crossed, their expressions guarded. Near the back, she spotted Rachel Reed, who gave a small, encouraging nod. Olivia began the session with a simple statement. We all know how it feels to be treated with respect and how it feels when we're not. The room quieted. Today isn't about pointing fingers. It's about understanding how our behavior, even unintentional, can impact the passengers who trust us. She shared scenarios based on real incidents, anonymized but familiar. One involved a passenger denied service without clear cause. Olivia described the discomfort, the subtle humiliation, and the long-term damage to the company's reputation. No one buys a ticket expecting perfection, she said, but they do expect fairness. When the session ended, Rachel approached Olivia. That was powerful, she said. People were actually listening. That's the first step, Olivia replied, tucking her presentation into her bag. Now comes the harder part, consistency. As she left the building, her phone pinged with an alert. A news article about the training session had gone live. Olivia hesitated before clicking. The headline read, Global Sky Airlines launches new training program after passengers' quiet stand. The accompanying photo showed Olivia disembarking the infamous flight, her expression calm but resolute. The comment section was already active. Some applauded her efforts, others dismissed it as a PR stunt. Olivia sighed, closing the browser. Change, she reminded herself, was rarely met with universal applause. That evening, she called her father. The session went well, she said after relaying the day's events. But I can already feel the pushback. Change makes people uncomfortable, he said. That means you're doing it right. The next morning, Olivia received an email from Alan. Just got word from HR. Crew members are already asking when they can attend the next training. Looks like we're on the right track. Olivia allowed herself a brief smile. The work was far from over, but momentum was building. And sometimes momentum was enough to change everything. Olivia Parker sat in her office, scrolling through the latest feedback from the initial training sessions. The results were promising. Participants reported increased awareness and a better understanding of inclusive service practices. But along with the praise came skepticism. Will this actually change anything? One attendant wrote. Or is it just another corporate checkbox? Olivia rubbed her temples. Change, she knew, required time and persistence. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Alan Green, the screen read. Hi, Alan, she answered, trying to sound more upbeat than she felt. Olivia, I just got off the phone with the board, Alan said, his voice measured. They want us to present the progress of the training initiative at next month's quarterly meeting. Next month? Olivia sat up straighter. That's sooner than I expected. They're curious, Alan explained. Some are fully on board, others not so much. That tracks, Olivia said, already mentally organizing the key points she'd need to convey. The days that followed blurred into marathon work sessions. Olivia pored over survey data, crafted a compelling narrative for the presentation, and collaborated with Rachel Reed to incorporate real crew experiences. The story of one flight attendant stood out. A young man named Luis, who, after attending the training, intervened when a colleague hesitated to serve a passenger who didn't look first class. Luis's calm, decisive action diffused the situation, and the passenger later wrote a heartfelt letter of gratitude. The night before the presentation, Olivia sat by her window with a cup of tea, the city lights reflecting in the glass. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Good luck tomorrow. You've got this. Olivia smiled and typed back. Thanks. Let's hope they see what we see. The next morning, she arrived at the airline's headquarters wearing the same gold bracelet she had worn on Flight 237. It had become a talisman, a tangible reminder of why she was doing this. Alan met her in the lobby, his tie slightly askew. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, Olivia replied. In the boardroom, executives sat around a polished oak table, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Olivia clicked the remote, and the screen displayed the title, Building a Culture of Dignity, The First Steps. Good morning, she began, steadying her breath. 2 months ago, a passenger was denied a simple request for champagne. But it wasn't just about the drink, it was about being made to feel invisible. Today, we want to share how we've begun addressing these underlying issues and creating a culture where every passenger feels seen and respected. She walked them through the program's framework, interactive workshops, real-time scenario training, and a new accountability structure with measurable outcomes. When she presented Luis's story, she noticed a subtle shift in the room. Doubt softened, replaced by genuine interest. As the presentation ended, Olivia braced herself for questions. Tom Henderson, the executive who had initially voiced skepticism, spoke first. It's a strong start, he admitted. But how do we ensure this sticks beyond the next quarter? By embedding these principles into daily operations, Olivia replied. We've introduced peer accountability and positive reinforcement. We're not just talking about values, we're operationalizing them. The board chair nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Miss Parker. We'll deliberate and get back to you. Outside the room, Olivia exhaled. Well? Alan asked. I think they heard us, Olivia said. Later that night, as she settled into bed, her phone buzzed one last time. A message from Alan read, The board approved the expansion. Full rollout next quarter. Congratulations. Olivia stared at the screen, disbelief giving way to satisfaction. The initiative wasn't just a proposal anymore, it was a reality. The morning after the board's decision, Olivia Parker woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. Blinking through the haze of sleep, she answered, Olivia, it's Alan. We've just received a call from the FAA. They want to commend the airline's new training program and are asking if you'd be willing to speak at their upcoming national conference. The request caught Olivia off guard. The FAA, she repeated, sitting upright. That's big. Huge, Alan confirmed. They believe what we've implemented could become a model for other airlines. Olivia promised to think it over and hung up. The disbelief lingered as she got ready for the day. A few months ago, she'd been an anonymous passenger quietly enduring an unjust moment. Now she was being asked to influence industry standards on a national scale. By midday, she was at the Global Sky office, reviewing updates with Rachel Reed. The young flight attendant beamed with pride as she shared feedback from colleagues who had embraced the new practices. It's like a weight's been lifted, Rachel said. We don't feel like bystanders anymore. Olivia smiled, feeling that same sense of empowerment reflected in Rachel's eyes. As they walked toward the elevators, a familiar voice stopped Olivia in her tracks. Miss Parker? She turned to find Luis, the flight attendant whose story she had shared during the presentation. He looked nervous but determined. I just wanted to say thank you, he said. That day on the flight, it made me rethink what it means to be part of the crew. I stood up because I saw you do it first. Olivia's throat tightened. Thank you, Luis, but you stood up because you knew it was right. I just reminded you of what you already believed. That evening, Olivia visited her father's house. As they sat on the porch, he rocked slowly in his chair. You know, he said, gazing at the fading sunset, what you've done here, it's more than changing an airline. It's changing how people see themselves. I hope so, Olivia said softly. Her father smiled. You remember what your grandfather used to say? People won't always remember what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. I think a lot of passengers and crew will never forget how you made them feel. As Olivia drove home, her thoughts drifted to that fateful flight. She remembered the clink of glasses, the cold dismissiveness, the heat of shame, and then the quiet decision to act. She parked, climbed the steps to her apartment, and paused by the mirror in the hallway. The same gold bracelet gleamed on her wrist. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. Another message from Rachel. Thought you'd like to know. A passenger on today's flight recognized me from the training story. She said it made her feel safer to fly with us. Olivia leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by a sense of fulfillment she'd never quite expected. The ripple effect was real. Dignity was contagious. She set the phone down and whispered into the stillness, We did it, Dad. We really did it. And just as she turned away, the screen lit up with one final notification, an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, Thank you for reminding me what true professionalism looks like. Her breath caught as she opened it. The sender's name? Jessica Hart. Miss Parker, the message began. I've had a lot of time to reflect since that day on the flight. I was wrong. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt you and others because of it. I've since started volunteering with a nonprofit that educates companies on bias awareness. Your grace in how you handled that day changed me more than I can say. Thank you. Olivia's eyes stung as she reread the message. Redemption wasn't a guarantee, but sometimes it arrived when least expected. The room felt still as she sat down, exhaling deeply. The fight for dignity and respect wasn't over. It never would be. But in that moment, she realized the victory wasn't just in changing policies or procedures. It was in changing hearts. The next morning, Olivia accepted the FAA's invitation. As she pressed send, she glanced out the window at the rising sun and felt an unshakable sense of purpose. The work would continue, the ripples would spread, and somewhere on a future flight, A passenger who once feared being invisible would be greeted with a warm smile and a glass of champagne. No questions, no hesitation, just the quiet affirmation of their place in the sky.